Welcome very, very much to Conversations. It's a pleasure to welcome to Conversations a dear friend of mine and the world, and a real major intellectual, and that's being Lawrence Feiner, Ph D. He has a PhD in mathematics from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's written on economics and has a very interesting take on things, including, I know, and preliminary talks we've had with him here in the studio. He wrote the book on the Reagan Revolution, as you can see, from 1980 to 90, seminal decade for predicting the world economic future. We could have reference to that. And he's also very taken with the importance at the moment, which we will get to, the Asian financial question or crisis. And but we're going to do that. And Lawrence, welcome so very much to Conversation. Okay. Really good to talk to you.
Okay, we're going to go over some things in the news. There have been a lot of things in the news.
There sure have.
The government shutdown, the debt ceiling, Putin in Syria, the Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations, and the new president in Iran.
Yes, right. It's so much all in a couple of weeks. It's just been like a pinball machine.
But I think from the perspective of the long-term future, the most important thing happening is the Asian currency crisis.
It doesn't seem to be having the same kind of coverage in the news.
No, it doesn't have the same kind of coverage.
But you think it's really significant?
It's really significant.
Okay, well, let's talk about that.
Now, I'd like to go over the circumstances leading to it.
Okay.
And this is something that we wrote on our blog, the circumstances leading to the current Asian currency crisis.
Okay. When did you post this?
I posted this in July of 2013.
July, just of this year. Okay.
So I'll give it and then give an update because things have happened since then.
Okay, do, by all means.
In our 1984 Japanese book, World Economy Big Prediction, we predicted that barring some really revolutionary new technology of physical production, a la cold fusion, a future long-term engine of growth for the world economy would have to be modernization of the less developed countries. In making this prediction, we used our observations on technology and the solo economic growth model. The problem is that despite the impressive growth in some third world countries, the global institutions to facilitate this growth have not developed. Basically, the current problems with the world economy, trade tensions, bubbles, cash crises, debt crises, etc., are caused by two global failures.
Okay.
One, the failure to create a pro-third world global fiscality that can stimulate third world economies directly.
Fiscality. Yeah, dealing with fiscal policy.
Like a expanded World Bank, a vastly expanded World Bank. Samir Amin calls for this. And two, the failure of global urban and rural land reform in the developing world, and the subsequent failure to expand the South's internal market enough, forcing them to rely on exports to the West.
Is the term the South the same as emerging markets?
Emerging markets is called the South.
More or less the South.
The North is the developed countries.
Right.
The South is the underdeveloped.
Okay, say something just off the thing. You said cold fusion. Do you believe in Pond's cold fusion?
No,
not that, but just cold fusion.
No, I don't believe in it.
You didn't want to just say, because fusion's been over the horizon ever since I've been an adult. Every year they say 5 years we're going to get to fusion, the energy crisis is over. But it's a small point. But go ahead.
Anyway, in 1985, there was a 3-volume set called Third World Development.
Okay.
Very impressive 3-volume set with articles about commerce in the third world.
Who published by whom?
Enver Karim.
Okay.
And it had editorials, guest editorials by Ronald Reagan, George Shultz, and Caspar Weinberger.
When was this?
1985.
Oh, 85. Okay.
Now, they stress free trade, and one of them, I believe it was Schultz, stressed the need for a cautious land reform in third world countries.
Okay,
So I think that's interesting. That somebody in the Reagan administration would be that progressive.
Yeah, right. Okay, that is.
Okay, now in my first appearance on this show, in 12/27/11, I went over the third world debt and oil crises.
Right.
So I really won't go over them again because we need the time.
We can just go to the YouTube version.
No, you go to the YouTube, Lawrence Feiner, 12/27/11, and then I give the third world debt.
It's on the record,
It's on the record. The third world debt and oil crisis.
Yeah, right. Okay, good.
We'll jump right into the Reagan response to these crises, which is the so-called Reagan debt-led model of growth.
Debt-led. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, fine. The Reagan administration adopted a policy of drastic tax cuts, vastly increased military spending, running a huge budget deficit and trade deficits. In other words, the U.S. became the borrower, consumer, and importer of last resort, in the words of David Hale of Kemper Financial Securities, hopefully giving the third world countries, which were undergoing austerity, some place to export to.
Okay.
By the mid-'80s, this policy ran into the roadblock of rising protectionist sentiment in the U.S. It was at this point that the Reagan Revolution came up with a concept that was to dominate global development strategy. In order to explain this concept, it is important to observe that the Reagan Revolution was not so much a revolution as it was a continuation and intensification of long-standing U.S. policies towards global economic growth. Since 1945, the U.S. had historically run budget and trade deficits in order to act as an engine of growth for the rest of the world. The Reagan debt-led model of growth simply put this strategy into full throttle by an order of magnitude increase in the U.S. budget and trade deficits, and in order to ward off inflation, financed the deficits by debt creation rather than monetary creation, as it had been done under Carter.
Okay, yeah.
The Reagan debt-led model of global growth, however unpalatable it might have seemed from a bookkeeping point of view, was in fact a decisive strategy. For several years, it put the U.S. squarely back in charge of the world economy and allowed the U.S. to break the international OPEC West developing country gridlock on global economic strategy. The world's most important commodity was not oil, but the U.S. dollar. As Paul Volcker said, the most important price today is not oil, but the price of a dollar.
He did, yeah. And Volcker took really strong. We had 20% inflation. He had a lot of things. Anyway, go ahead.
Commodity prices plunged. Large parts of the global economy were turned into a global distress sale, and U.S. growth was financed from the proceeds. A significant portion of the third world's consumer markets were shut down and replaced by the U.S. consumer market. The world's financial power and market power, which had dispersed between the U.S., Europe, Japan, and OPEC, was now pulled firmly back into the hands of the U.S. In short, the Reagan response in 1982 to 10 years of Western, OPEC, and third world bickering was, "You'll do it my way," even if I'm not quite sure what my way is.
Yeah, and he also they went out and struck PAPCO, and he broke the labor. He promised them that he would not. They would be able to do their strike, and then after he got elected, he reneged on that and just fired them massively and broke the back of that labor theory of value contribution of the workers of air traffic control.
In other words,
that
the
was
U.S.
a major break of the union movement. Yeah.
Okay, and now the U.S. was now able to set the agenda for discussions of global development strategy for the next decade. The strategy toward North-South development that ultimately emerged from this U.S. dominance was the so-called neoliberal strategy. Its most important feature was the initiation in 1982 of a new round of global trade negotiations, the Uruguay round of the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, GATT.
GATT.
To give some background, the origin of the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs and some of its stillborn predecessor, the International Trade Organization, go back to American-British wartime discussions concerning the shape of a post-war world economy. Despite vigorous efforts by developing countries, the draft ITO charter only paid lip service to development concerns. The GATT, a separate temporary agreement negotiated by 23 countries, which became permanent when ITO was never ratified, was even less receptive to the needs of the developing countries. Tariffs on trade and manufacturers between developed countries were reduced substantially under the auspices of GATT, but products in which the developing world had a comparative advantage, such as textiles or agricultural products, received much less favorable treatment. In addition, when the developing countries diversified into industrial exports, they faced the proliferation of new discriminatory non-tariff trade restrictions directed specifically at them.
Okay,
There were quotas and various other restrictions on third world manufacturing exports.
Right, and there was an upshot in Seattle. Remember Seattle when there was a great...
when it admitted China into the UTO, I think.
Well, yeah, and there was a great stirring among the people who took exception to the direction things were going at Seattle, a major year of protest among a lot of people.
The basic thrust of the Uruguay round was as follows. It had been estimated that the above restrictions on third world imports to the West cost the third world $500 billion each year. The U.S. would agree to abolish these restrictions, thus providing $500 worth of economic benefits to the third world. In return, the third world will agree to open up their service economies to imports, give wide autonomy to outside investment, agree to strengthen their patent protection of Western technologies, thus, according to some critics, locking in Western advantages in these technologies.
Yeah, okay, yeah, right. Now,
the Mexican leftist Castaneda called this market access with draconian reciprocity. Okay. According to the neoliberal strategy, such an agreement, and even the promise of such an agreement, would bring about a massive north-south capital transfer. This capital would be lured by the promise of access to Western markets, by cheap labor, and by a favorable climate for Western investments brought about by deregulation in the third world. This flood of capital investments would in turn jumpstart the third world economies, leading to a rising standard of living and open up markets for Western exports. The third world would follow the path of the dynamic Asian third world countries and would simultaneously break the cycle of slow growth, trade imbalances, and fiscal deficits with the West.
this was the claim.
Yeah, the claim.
Yeah.
In the meantime, the West's increased access to third world service sector and high-tech markets brought about by the GRAD agreement would reduce protectionist sentiment in the West. Quote, cheap labor is drawing investment and production away from the industrial countries. Plentiful goods and materials are crowding the world markets, and annual exports from the developing to industrialized markets have risen by $100 billion since 1989. A new economic order is being drawn. Eventually, the entire world should share the bounty of this new order. As nations develop, their need for imported goods rises, and worldwide demands grows. Multinationals expect the developing countries to become a vast new market by the end of the decade for Western high-tech, capital equipment, and services a la GATT, as productivity and income climbs worldwide. History is on the side of the optimists. Editorial from Business Week, 8/2/93.
Okay, right.
Okay.
So, yeah, okay.
Okay,
yeah.
so to look at another aspect of this, the economist Robert Lucas maintains that the reason why underdeveloped countries are underdeveloped is that they have a small amount of human capital, which is individual and social labor productivity. And the economist Heltman says that a developing country can increase its capital by exporting to the markets of the developed countries. Going up against first world competition increases the developing countries' learning by doing, or increases human capital. However, Lucas counters by saying he's the real third world basher, Lucas.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, however, Lucas counters by saying that the third world as a whole cannot do this because, quote, there is a zero-sum aspect with inevitable mercantilist overtones to productivity growth.
What kind of overtone?
Mercantilist.
What does that mean?
It means economic nationalist.
Okay.
In the
Okay,
economic nationalism in the developed
I didn't know
country.
that term. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Mercantilism preceded, Adam Smith argued against mercantilism
Okay, yeah.
in The Wealth of Nations.
Okay.
However, because there is a zero-sum aspect with inevitable mercantilist overtones, mercantilist overtones fueled by learning by doing. What this means is that the vast majority of the human race cannot grow economically indefinitely simply by exporting to a small minority of the human race. In other words, following Samir Amin, the internal market of the developing countries has to be expanded directly by urban and rural land reform and by a pro-third world global fiscality that funds sustainable projects in the third world.
Samir Amin was great. He
was great,
Eurocentrism.
Yeah, he wrote Eurocentrism.
Yeah, really a major book. Yeah, he was Senegal. He was in Senegal.
Yeah, his third world forum is based in Dakar, Senegal.
Right. That's right. So this is all. This is your writing now. That
my writing. It's my writing. It's an update we put on the blog, which I'm reading.
Okay.
And the Cambridge Forecast.
How long is it, and how you want to read the whole thing?
Yeah, I read it. It's not that much longer.
Okay. Go ahead.
No,
lay it out. Yeah.
Okay.
Because you think it's the most important.
I think it's the most important for the long term.
Looking at all these other things that are so in the news and so capturing
the most important thing is the Asian currency.
Grounding for understanding something.
Because
major.
The West just does not have the consumer markets to fund promote long-term growth indefinitely. It has to rely in part on some third world markets.
Yeah.
And
some markets that can do. No, when you talk about demand, but you're talking about effective demand. That is people with money to clear the market of what can be produced.
Yeah, there's an oversupply of labor, an oversupply of capital, an oversupply of commodities.
And what the people need is money to buy that which can be produced.
And
how
basically,
are we going to get money to that?
Yeah, and basically, there's been very conservative policies in the West.
Yeah.
And
I heard you say zero sum.
The third world, because of its narrowness of its internal markets, is not able to provide a sufficient market for Western goods.
Okay, go ahead and finish your thing. You got a few more sentences there you want to read off, and then we can go into
Although
it.
Lucas underestimated the willingness of the developed countries to absorb imports from the developing countries. They were more willing than he thought they'd be.
Right.
Okay, to continue with our history, the nativist backlash to the proposed GATT agreement was the Perot candidacy.
Perot, 92, yeah.
92.
He got nearly 20%.
He got nearly 20% of the vote.
There was a lot of discontent abroad, yeah.
When Clinton turned out to be a nutcase, when Perot turned out to be a nutcase, it was Clinton that benefited from the sentiment.
Okay, yeah, I think that's true.
Now,
he might have got Clinton elected, yeah.
You know, Clinton, that's very interesting. Bush said he would not give loan guarantees to Israel unless Israel stopped settlement building.
Really?
Clinton objected to that. Clinton practically called Bush an anti-Semite.
Right, really.
And he said that the settlements should not be stopped unilaterally, but should be part of on the negotiating table. And he really threw a kibosh in the Arab-Israeli peace negotiations by doing that. And I think there was a widespread distrust of Clinton. Why is Clinton getting involved with Israeli settlements?
Ooh, okay.
You know, notice, I believe that Clinton was third after Perot initially. Then when Rabin won the election in Israel, Perot dropped and Clinton moved up, and he became the head guy.
Yeah, right.
Because Bush, you know,
You think that was the defining thing, that stance that Clinton took?
Well, I mean, Bush was very popular after the Gulf War, but he squandered his popularity on opposing Shamir. I mean, you know, the American-Israeli relations are the third world of American politics.
I'd say
the third rail of American politics.
Third rail.
The third rail of American politics.
Yeah.
You know, Percy,
you're right. Yeah, can't be
Percy,
mentioned,
Finley, a lot of Bush, a lot of people have gone south because of their standing vis-a-vis Israel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Worth focusing on. Yeah, right.
And it was Clinton that passed the GATT legislation and the smaller but similar NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement.
And they were also leading to get rid of Glass-Steagall also.
Glass-Steagall.
That's another thing that was growing up.
Yeah, the deregulation, right.
Yeah,
the deregulation of the financial.
Well, they didn't want the investment banks and the commercial banks in the same boat together.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was got around, and with 99 he signed that, with Clinton,
By the way, do you know who's really anti-third world? David Landis.
Oh, David Landis?
He's a Harvard economic historian who always writes third world bashing books.
Oh, really? Okay.
He
always
writes third world bashing books. Okay. After the NAFTA agreement, Mexico, under pressure from the Clinton administration, kept the peso artificially high. See, Clinton wanted us to have a trade surplus with Mexico because he needed support for the upcoming GATT negotiations at the end of 94.
Oh, 94.
The NAFTA negotiations were at the end of 93. The NAFTA legislation was the end of 93, and the upcoming GATT legislation was scheduled at the end of 94. So he didn't want people to get frightened by trade with Mexico. So he practically forced the Mexicans to artificially keep their peso up so that they'd have a trade deficit with the United States. Okay. The problems began immediately. After the NAFTA agreement, Mexico, under pressure from the Clinton administration, kept the peso artificially high so that the U.S. could have a trade surplus with Mexico in order to generate support for the GATT agreement. After the GATT agreement passed in 1974, the Mexican debt had built up. The debt had built up to keep its currency became unpayable, and Mexico had to be bailed out by a special U.S. fund.
That's right. I remember that. Yeah,
the Economic Stabilization Fund, hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah, I know. I remember. Yeah.
After the passage of GATT, Clinton, to avoid wage nativism, fear of trade with low-wage countries, talked up the Asian economies, saying that they were the wave of the future. In addition, the Southeast Asian economies pegged their currencies to the dollar, which was weakening against the yen. Money surged into Southeast Asian countries, and one investor put it, investing in Asia became a religion.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the Japanese yen was rising dangerously against the dollar and endangering Japan's exports to the U.S. In 1995, Japan took action to lift the dollar up by buying U.S. bonds. 1995.
A lot of people will buy
Yeah.
U.S. bonds, particularly Treasury bills.
Yeah.
They're very safe. Yeah.
As the dollar rose, the Southeast Asian countries became less and less competitive, and their economies collapsed in a wave of currency devaluations, which is what is happening recently,
yeah.
starting in the spring of
Also, I'm
2013.
not so sure those Treasury bills are going to be so much.
After
the 17th of October of this
my
year,
God.
if they keep going toward the cliff, yeah.
The IMF raised hundreds of billions of dollars to bail them out. Money flowed out of the Southeast Asian countries into the U.S., causing the internet bubble and causing a temporary surge of U.S. growth, which together with the tax rise wiped out the
Was that
deficit.
to cause the internet bubble? It wasn't just the technology or the implications?
Yeah, it's kind of rapture with the technology also.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, by the way,
Yes, sir.
I taught for 5 years, and I got a $20,000 pension from that, a $20,000 a year pension.
For the 5 years teaching
From
where?
the 5 years. Because I had all my money in a high-tech stock fund in TIAA, Teachers Insurance Annuity Association.
Okay, yeah.
And I sold it at the height of the internet bubble.
Oh, so you
back
were...
in 99.
So okay, well,
Then
congratulations.
Then it went into the stable income fund, which had a very high interest rate then. Okay, that's just an aside. Okay.
Right. Well,
Okay.
Okay.
Meanwhile, okay, fine. Under the Bush and Obama administrations, the U.S. ran a huge budget and trade deficit. The U.S. ran huge budget and trade deficits and printed an enormous amount of dollars. This kept U.S. interest rates low, and money flowed into the stock markets of the developing countries, which had a higher rate of return. As a result, in the early 21st century, the developing countries were growing rapidly, even as the developed countries stagnated, and 500 million people were lifted out of poverty
In China?
in the developing world, all around Brazil, under Lula.
But they say the 300 million may be living well in Beijing and or Peking and Shanghai, but you got 1 billion that are still living on less than $1 a day
less than $1
in
a day.
China.
However, in the spring of 2003, a Fed chief Bernanke said that the U.S. was reconsidering its monetary policy and would stop its bond buying program for fear of another real estate bubble like the one under Bush Jr.
Have you seen the things in China where they have huge cities built with these great giant buildings that are totally empty because there's nobody able to get into them? It's just incredible.
It's overinvestment.
Well, and we're going to get to the Asian bubble now. This is leading to it. The Asian situation, you think...
Well, China is reining back. It's trying to rein back speculative spending by tight money and restrictions on bank lending.
Yeah.
And it seems to be going well the last I saw.
You think? Okay. Well, we want to get to that. This is background for what you think is the major issue beyond all these things that are in the headline. Right?
Yeah, the currency, the Asian crisis.
Okay, and where is it leading?
Okay, fine. Okay. The surge of money into third world markets stopped on a dime. In fact, in June of 2003, the amount of money going into third world markets dropped by 90% from the month earlier. It remains to be seen whether the Fed concerns about the health of the developing countries' economies will cause the Fed to back off. Okay, and then now there are some... Okay, where?
This is right off your blog, right? Yeah.
Okay, right off the blog. Okay, it looks like the Fed has backed off its proposed monetary tightening, as we predicted sort of in the blog update. In other words, it has to overstimulate the American economy and real estate market in order to safeguard third world solvency. By overstimulating the U.S. asset prices, stocks, and houses, the American consumer starts to spend, hopefully, as his 401k looks better, and America absorbs more imports worldwide, going back to the American consumer as locomotive, absent a new locomotive.
Okay, now, maybe spell it out in terms of, we're talking on October 3 of 2013. What again, you said the most important issue that is overlooked is the situation in the emerging markets. This is primer, or this is information that should be understood?
There's another footnote to what I did. The proposed U.S. monetary policy and actual Chinese monetary policy has severely impacted emerging market currencies, particularly in India and Southeast Asia, causing a currency crisis, forcing some of Asia backward to a rehash of the 1997-8 bat crisis, only this is a worse and more widespread crisis.
Okay.
Okay, now...
Yeah, let's put it all in some... You take a drink of water if you want. It
yeah.
might help you clear up the
Okay.
little cough you get. I get that too, you know. But so how does this all relate? This is history of the thing and everything. You understand it. How does it relate to things here on October 3 of 2013? This crisis in the emerging markets. You said
it's forcing...
is a major issue
It's a
that
major
should be
issue.
understood.
It's-
We have to understand all of this in order to understand that.
The U.S. situation.
Okay, you think.
Okay, now...
Ah.
The Fed is forced to keep interest rates low,
Yeah, they
increasing the
zero.
probability
Yeah.
of a real estate bubble.
Yeah, right.
That's one consequence. Another consequence is, in the future, third world markets are going to be important for U.S. growth,
Okay.
and these have been depressed by the currency crisis. So these are two factors. Okay, now as Martin Core of South Center points out, there's a hopeful sign, which is that the developing countries are starting to help themselves.
Okay.
The developing countries are starting to help themselves, and they're putting together, with the help of the BRICS, Brazil,
Yeah,
Russia,
yeah.
India, China,
Yeah.
a multi-$100 billion economic stabilization fund. So that's the one hopeful sign of what's going on. It's forcing the third world countries to rely on each other more, rather than competing with each other.
And is this something you can see developing in a positive sense? I don't quite get, we talked about Syria and we talked about these other things that are in the news, but what exactly is the direction that you either warn against or encourage in terms of the development of the real world?
In the terms of development of the real world, the U.S. disorganization is impacting the ability of the Doha, the Doha round, Doha Qatar round of agricultural negotiations, which the third world needs. So that's one factor.
Yeah.
And the future markets have to partially come from the third world.
Why is the world having such economic problems now? As we have a tremendous productive capability that we have.
It's under consumption. I mean, it's really...
It's not under. I heard you use a sentence in there, demand. Demand is something you can say demand and supply. You have supply, you have demand.
We have too
but
much
it's
supply.
But you can say there's a demand for food, but if you don't have money to buy food, that's not effective demand. Do we have to differentiate between people with the ability to buy what is available for their wants and their needs is lacking? We don't have a way of getting effective demand into the hands of the people to differentiate that from people who would like to have some new thing, but they simply don't have what is called the money to buy that which they would like to have. Do you understand?
Yeah, I understand.
So the demand has to be effective demand, it's lacking all over the world.
It was the failure of the developing countries to institute land. Now, Korea and Taiwan and Japan instituted land reform under American and Japanese
land
occupation.
reform is okay.
Land reform was the key. India had land reform for 10% of the country in Punjab.
In Punjab,
which really increased agricultural productivity. And so basically, it was again, to repeat, the failure to create a pro-third world global fiscality.
Okay, you're using language of fiscality. That is a tax range, a tax or
meaning a development bank.
A development bank.
Yeah, I mean much larger than the World Bank.
Why is it humanity has such a hard time being? It has a potential. Let me put out a premise and see what you say. Let's say we have the potential of humanity as part of an ecological order and part of an evolutionary process. They have a tremendous capability that's growing. We've used the term existentially significant or something. And along one vector, there is the possibility, as we were talking before the camera started rolling, that over 200,000 years of our existence as a species, we developed weapon systems that was the basis of political legitimacy of various systems in place. And the basic thing that gave legitimacy to it was the one who had the power to intimidate or co-opt other people, other tribes, and make their tribes strong. It's called realpolitik.
Yeah, right.
The weapon systems have become, you and I agreed, at least in a way, that the weapon systems after about sometime in the 60s, 70s, became species lethal.
Species lethal. Oh,
The Trident submarines alone, I think, have the capacity to wipe out the entire species. That's brand new.
That's brand new.
We've never had that possibility.
Well, 1962 was a really dangerous year.
Oh, it was the scariest moment in my
dangerous
life.
year was 1983.
83 was 83.
There were some war games. I mean, Reagan's rhetoric was very confrontational with the Soviet Union.
He wanted to destroy it.
The evil empire, and he said, offhand, he said he was caught saying, Russia's been outlawed, the bombing will begin immediately.
Well, they had set up a system based on the thinking in 1848 or 59 and Karl Marx and the idea of the labor theory of value and all of this, and they had done away with the private sector in the Soviet Union, so it was a challenge that was going to fall of its own weight. Okay?
Now, in 1983, there were Reagan was being very belligerent.
Oh, yes.
And there were war games, NATO war games. And
remember 82, when they had one, were you here in New York at that time when we had, do you remember that? Or maybe some of the younger people don't mention it. It was literally over 1 million people came when he was going to put, missiles in Europe.
Oh, the 1982
82,
March.
there were over 1 million people in Central Park.
Oh, I remember that.
Do you remember that?
Because I was
unbelievable.
I was in the demonstration protesting the Israeli invasion of Lebanon.
Okay, right. Okay.
We had a little demonstration of our own.
Yeah, but that was against his.
There were about 10 people there.
But he is worshipped on the right by people who stood up to that evil empire, and we won. So we're the winner.
Oh, it was Gorbachev, really. Not so much as Reagan as Gorbachev.
It was Gorbachev in 82, too, or 62, too,
and Khrushchev in 62.
Khrushchev, who did not go over the
crisis.
But anyway, the point being, at the level of capability, we can now stop evolution. We can destroy the whole species. Now, on the other side, we have a tremendous, don't we? Have a tremendous capability to provide the needs and the wants of the world's population in an unprecedented way. That is equally existentially significant in terms of the condition which is trying to be achieved. It would be like a future, a liberation or some sort, that's trying to be achieved within the institutional structures that has been qualitatively changed coming out of history. It's a qualitatively different thing that we can stop the evolution of consciousness, the whole evolutionary process on one side. We have the ability, really, quite literally, to, if we had the right way of dealing with it, of perhaps transcending reasonably considered material scarcity for the whole of the Homo sapiens, the whole species of the world, and the ecology that is equally existentially new, that we don't have a model or a design to realize in a positive sense the way in which we can form capital and also distribute demand to be able to give people with an ecological appreciation, the ability to purchase what it is they would like to reasonably need or reasonably want.
Now,
we need a new economic overarching understanding of the existential reality in which things are occurring.
I saw on the military channel that in 1983 there were war games, NATO war games. Russia thought it was under attack.
Oh, that's what you were talking about.
Russia thought it was under attack. So in addition to 1962, 1983 was a really dangerous year.
You could have a glitch. A glitch in the program or something. But we live in that time of a qualitative transformation, perhaps. I mean, it's being felt intuitively.
In 1984, Reagan's policy towards the Soviet Union moderated. I think the KAL incident got so dangerous.
Oh, that's the Korean
airline.
Yeah, Korean airline. Yeah, and it was so on hair trigger alert and all that kind of stuff from the geopolitical understanding. But now, what about? What is the current situation in terms of this issue that you think is something that the citizens or we all should understand, very significant in terms of affecting the human condition of the situation in the emerging market that you gave primer to understanding what? And what is the reality in terms that can be in a pattern way understood by citizens, and then what is the prescription in terms of our political and intellectual leadership?
They should realize that the U.S. needs the third world.
Realize that the U.S.
There are all sorts of fantasies about liberation from the third world, but they're just fantasies.
Okay, with it,
That,
so
and that finally the consumer markets in the West are not enough to facilitate perpetual growth.
okay, so
I mean, according to
the wretched of the worth, as Franz Feiner would talk about, are really have to be empowered as a way of having the system work well, and we can do that now in a way that we historically weren't able to.
The most recognized theory of economic growth is the Solo, huh?
No.
Not Han Solo.
Han Solo was out of
Robert Solo.
Yeah, Robert. Okay, yeah, right.
His neoclassical theory of growth.
Yeah.
I don't give much credence to the.
You're talking about economic theorizing.
Economic theorizing.
Okay.
And it's had the most empirical tests and stood the test of time.
Yeah.
And it says there are basically two sources of growth. One of them is labor growth.
Well, is that synonymous with or related to the labor theory of value?
No, not really.
That informs the left, more or less?
No, not really.
No.
It's labor growth.
Labor growth.
And the other is what's called total factor productivity, which is technology.
Right.
Now, the populations of the developed world are stable.
Wow.
And furthermore,
you mean in terms of growth?
In terms of growth,
in terms of number, yeah.
And Germany has a real problem of underpopulation.
Yeah, right. I understand.
I
understand that. Yeah.
Because it doesn't treat immigrants well. Japan.
Right. Okay.
And the U.S. has an advantage in that it treats immigrants better than the other countries.
Yeah, they got a bill.
But still, there isn't not going. Even with immigration, there's not going to be enough labor growth.
Well, in a sense, what it's saying is there's always been the wretched of the earth, and throughout most all of history, Lawrence, there's been a few people who run everything with clubs and armies that beat down the people, and the people are wallowing around in the mud of poverty. That's been the serfs. They're like serfs. Right, exactly. So the people are like serfs on a feudal estate, where the assets are all owned by a tiny class of people. It's always been like that.
Yeah, okay, but
hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
With some advancement necessary, we get penicillin, we get some inventions, and we invent telescopes and things, enlightenment and everything. But by and large, it's never been really for the body politic of the mass of the people. It's always been just a few people running everything, and they're bowing down to their authority.
Okay, anyway, to continue my point.
Okay.
Now, it's labor growth in population, labor growth.
Yeah.
Or what's called total factor productivity, which is really technology.
Okay, well, that's extension of capability, that we have a unique capability of making the world other than, in an Eden-like sense, the way the creatures are embedded in nature and encounter nature.
Except for computer technology.
Yeah, okay.
The technology of physical production has been stable in the West.
Well, it's not only the I just saw the thing. They got a new Mac thing that's coming. It's growing exponentially. You're a mathematician. You understand exponential. It's not arithmetic. It's exponential. The capability of information technology.
Information technology.
It's coming. We got all these new super. What do you call them?
Supercomputers.
Super cell phones.
Cell phones,
like that. I saw a thing on the Science Channel where they rated the most important developments of human, and they had it down, a countdown, to what's like the hit. Remember the hit parade? You're too young to remember the hit parade, where they would say the most popular song.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, you remember. Okay. Anyway, but they had it down, drum roll. And they said, okay, they invented gasoline, they invented the pavement, they invented penicillin, they invented these things, and then they invented the computer, and then they had, for a special thing, they said, just in a class all by itself, and they had a drum roll, #1 most important development of changing the human and ecological order of the world is the smartphone.
Right.
Qualitatively different than everything that's gone before.
Time Warner Man of the Year?
No.
A Person of the Year?
No.
Not Time Warner, excuse me. Time Magazine.
Time. Who was it?
Time. I'm just. You know what it is. I mean, what?
Oh.
Now there were 2 years in which Arafat should have been the Person of the Year.
Okay.
One was '82 after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon.
Yeah.
And the other was.
That was something.
The other was '88 after the Intifada, after Arafat recognized Israel. And both those years, Time Magazine avoided the issue. In '82, the computer was Person of the Year.
Right.
And in '88, the planet Earth was Person of the Year.
Yeah, right. So okay. Yeah. Okay, well, all well and good, but so what do you think? I mean, I don't think there's do you think we have a unique capability that is not characteristic of all of history? There's no way you could have, it depended upon slow growth of our understanding or of our learning or the extending of our ability to make it's a big difference, Lawrence, between wandering around in the wilderness and maybe finding a cave that you can shelter in, and building a house with a furnace and an air conditioner and that kind of. You can make the world different according to that, and you got exponential increasing. And not only is it, if I may, another thing I saw on one of those History Channel or Science Channel thing, they got some good stuff, is that and Hans Moravec. Did you know Hans Moravec and the group down at Carnegie Mellon doing robotics?
Right.
The development is just as in information technology exponent. They're also developing robotics.
Right.
I mean, physical things for producing things, and everything practically is being produced in the material world by robotic systems. Yeah, they got every product that you have practically is just done, and people are standing there watching the whole process go, and turning out a vast ability to turn out everything we need.
None of these technologies get us away from the need for the third world.
Well, the third world would be the least advantaged people. Could we say we got third world people living here who are poverty struck? People who are poor. Why don't we just say poor people who don't have any way of having demand? Rather than saying third world. We have third world in the United States. We do, don't we? Don't we have a class system in the United States that goes against all kinds of people that are disadvantaged? The disadvantaged people.
I'd like to make one more point about technology.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm ranting.
One technology that's been talked about as getting us away from the third world, or from the poor, is fracking.
Fracking is,
Hydraulic fracking is the fracturing of rock by a pressurized liquid. Some hydraulic fractures form naturally. Certain veins or dikes are examples. Induced hydraulic fracturing or hydrofracturing, commonly known as fracking, is a technique in which typically water is mixed with sand and chemicals, and the mixture is ejected at high pressure into a wellbore to create small fractures, typically less than 1 millimeter, along which fluids such as gas and brine water may migrate to the well. Some analysts have portrayed fracking as a technology a la cold fusion that can generate environmentally sustainable growth in the developed countries independent of third world growth.
You use cold fusion. You think of why cold fusion? Why not just fusion?
Well, because
cold fusion I associate with ponds.
Cold fusion.
And you say that's
cold
nonsense.
Fusion, that's nonsense, yeah. But it is a technology in which all bets are off.
Okay, so ponds cold fusion is nonsense.
Although people believe it, in other words, a lot of people believed cold fusion when it first came.
Well, are you're disassociating ponds cold fusion from cold fusion? Fleischmann cold fusion.
Yeah.
But cold fusion is a possibility?
No, I don't think so.
You don't?
I think that was just a farce.
Oh, you're just throwing that in. Okay.
As a type of technology,
because I'll tell you, all my adult life, it's always been we're going to get the Fermi.
We're going to get fusion.
We're going to get once we get to fusion, the power of the sun and being able to do it, and it's just over the horizon.
It's just over the horizon, exactly.
And it's been every time. It just why does it not? Why don't we get to where we can use fusion as a source of?
It's very difficult technology. Evidently.
Well, apparently but they were predicting in the 40s this fusion's right over the horizon. It's going to solve all our problems.
Okay, anyway, fracturing. Some analysts have portrayed fracking as a technology a la cold fusion that can generate environmentally sustainable growth in the developed countries independent of third world growth. We disagree for 3 reasons. Fracking can contaminate drinking water with toxic chemicals. Second, the methane released by fracking has a far more potent greenhouse effect than CO2, which is methane is a far more potent.
Yeah, it is. A lot of that's coming up from mastodons coming up in Siberia.
From Siberia,
being defrosted too.
Even if fracking makes the West independent of the third world, energy independent, Western growth ultimately needs some markets in the developing countries. Fraction thus represents a misplaced autarky dream. The world economy is in a certain kind of traffic jam, which needs a new global growth pathway to exit the gridlock. This means a global systemic change.
Thank you for that. That I like. Yeah. What are the dimensions of a systemic change to the system by which an operating manual for Spaceship Earth that makes sense for all of the citizens,
the West should have a stimulation,
including the least advantaged and the ecology.
The West should have an economic stimulation program, but directed towards the poor, the global poor.
Well, but Don't you notice through all of history, all of our, like Jesus or all of them, they all said, take care of the least among you, and it's been roundly ignored by the political class. It's being roundly ignored by the political class now.
Yeah, I know.
They go in 12-star hotels and take care of themselves and get bought off by people with a lot of money, owning all the assets, and having no way for any ownership of the technology producing the wealth to be means of getting ownership to people so they have a way of distributing. They got no access to capital credit for investments that are going to pay for themselves out of their future earnings. There's what are some of the dimensions of a system of economic theorizing that we have to have and come upon, and where will we go to find some ideas that might be relevant?
Method of directly stimulating consumption by the poor, and those again, as I said before, a global World Development Bank far larger than the World Bank.
What about taxing the rich?
Yeah, taxing the rich.
How about taxing the rich at a higher rate? And what would it take politically to be able to tax the rich?
Question.
It was 92% under Eisenhower out of the Second World War.
Yeah, more global taxes on the rich to finance consumption and development.
Was that something that's part of a systemic order that perhaps is something we should
one thing which has been suggested is something called the climate bank.
Okay, talk.
In other words, with the developing countries, which are less developed, would sell CO2 emitting rights to the developed countries, and the climate bank would finance environmentally sustainable development by the developing countries.
It's a kind of Peter to pay Paul sort of thing, or something, or something. It seems like, or
it's
something.
But what was really needed was a massive global development bank.
Okay, spell that. That's your thinking. Okay?
And that's what Samir Amin says.
What would that? Where would it be? What would it be? What would be the context? How would it be financed?
It would be like the World Bank, only much larger. And it would finance land reforms and environmentally sustainable
You're talking
development.
about land reforms that could get over latifundista and large land
redistribute land. Redistribute
land.
Yeah.
Okay. Does it get back to Henry George and so forth?
Well, that I don't know. I'm not familiar with Henry George.
You're familiar? Okay. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, well...
So a problem in the third world is that the land itself, or agriculture...
is very unequally distributed.
Is very unequally... What about the capital instruments? Are also unequally...
Yeah, they're also unequally distributed.
Everything is held by a small plutocratic class in every political entity and the international order.
Yeah, exactly.
And how do we get over that, and how do we get some sort of equity to the mass of the people? Not only land reform, I mean, in terms of, land, but also all the capital instruments that are responsible increasingly for production. That's one of the things. Well, what would the World Bank do, or the expanded World Bank that you're talking about? And that relates to the Asian thing that you wanted to talk about.
Well, the Asians are starting, the hopeful sign is that this is called the Chiang Mai Initiative.
Okay, I've not heard of that. Spell it out, please. This is a hopeful thing?
It's a hopeful thing. Because
tell me something hopeful. I'll be happy to have anything hopeful.
The Asian countries the emerging markets are starting to help themselves with a multi-$100 billion stabilization fund.
Coming from where? Where's the initiative? Is it located geographically?
Well, China has a large surplus, so coming from China.
Yeah, they do, yeah.
Else, there's... so then...
But that's based on slave labor from a lot of people,
I'll try to get Martin Corr's address, because he was talking about this.
Okay, Martin Corr, I don't know.
Martin Corr is of the South Center. He's an expert in third world development.
Okay.
Okay, well, anyway, passing on, because we want to get to other topics.
Okay, yeah, we only got about 10 minutes left. So let's get in the zingers, or the thing that can put...
the Arab-Israeli peace negotiations.
Okay, what about that?
Okay, now, there are currently 513 Jewish settlers in the West Bank. It is difficult to imagine Israel withdrawing them or allowing them to live under Palestinian control. In 1989, when there were far fewer settlers than there are today, the noted Israeli political scientist Meren Ben-Venisti, who was deputy mayor under Teddy Kollek, maintained that there were too many settlers to make a Palestinian state viable, and that therefore the only solution to the conflict, which wasn't an apartheid Bantustan, was a binational democratic state where Jews and Arabs had equal rights.
It's looking an awful like apartheid now.
Yeah, it's looking awful like
Doesn't it look like apartheid?
And by the way...
I mean, how can they avoid that being seen as apartheid, that whole situation?
But by the way, Netanyahu, when peace talks commenced, as they did, Netanyahu announced a wide-ranging settlement expansion program.
And in Jerusalem now they're building.
In Jerusalem now,
Well, they've won.
They've
like
won, yeah.
like when the the people from Europe came and they encountered the indigenous people in the United States, to become the United States. They won because they had the Gatling gun and they had the superior technology. They won. They conquered.
Yeah.
So they've been conquered. The Palestinians and the Arabs and everything have been conquered by
Right.
these good guys,
Yeah.
and that right? I mean,
Okay, but-
that's realpolitik. Whoever's got the club can beat the other one,
Yeah.
or co-opt them with PR or something like that, and establish themselves as the winner.
However, there are some hopeful signs as regards American Jewish attitudes towards Israeli intransigence. Recently, the New York Post had an editorial debunking the peace negotiations. All the letters to the editor regarding the editorial were from Jewish people who supported a two-state solution and blasted the Post editorial. Mm-hmm. Also, on the 22nd of August, the right-wing Orthodox synagogue in New York invited the noted critic of Israel, Peter Beinart, to give a talk. Mm-hmm. So that's a hopeful sign. We're looking for hopeful signs now.
Uh-huh.
That's a sort of hopeful sign.
Well, and the animosity directed by Mr. Netanyahu. He's here talking to the president yesterday, and Charlie Rosen spelling it all out and saying the Zion, the Jewish state, and their animosity toward the country of Iran and toward the Islamic world is maybe the major problem confronting the world.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet this is taken as our undying ally and so forth. But so it sounded to me like the new president of Iran was talking. Do you think the Putin thing with Syria, the weapons, the Putin coming in and getting Mr. Obama off the hook?
Yeah, I think that's a hopeful sign.
And then the statement by the president from Iran talking about maybe a new relationship.
Yeah.
Is there a possibility that there can be an overarching peaceful development and reconciliation of the problems that are confronting that part of the world?
Yeah, I hope so.
You think so?
I hope so. I don't know if it will.
I mean, it all came within a couple of weeks.
Within a couple
all
of
these
weeks.
major earth-shaking developments.
Also,
and then on top of that, they decided to close down our government, our Congress. And we got a date with October 17th where they're going to maybe just go over they're going to just default on all of our debt.
Yeah, exactly.
That's going to play hell on everything, isn't it?
That's going to play hell on everything.
I mean, the world, isn't it in a very calamity? And you think this issue that you're bringing up about that
because
is
that's
something that should be up on the table with equally
with the debt crisis,
of what's going
with
on.
the debt limitation.
Okay, because it has that much. It's a little harder to get through. It's a little more nuanced, right?
Yeah. Also, there's an organization called the National Iranian American Council. And if you're interested in signing a petition against war with Iran, go to www.niacouncil.org.
niacouncil.org. niacouncil.org. There's also the American-Iranian Friendship Committee with the Omanis. You know the Omanis, Adishar?
No, I don't know.
They're doing great stuff in terms of trying to get some peaceful things going with the country of Iran and with the larger Islamic Ummah, which is something that is really the major challenge that's confronting us all. Well, I'll tell you, these things are changing. Let me ask you just a closing thing. We only got 2 or 3 minutes left. Are you, from a consideration, you're an intellectual, your blog and everything is highly recommended. You've done great work, and that book, that thing you wrote about Reagan is really worth going to. You're a follower of Samir Amin, a major voice, and Cornel West, I presume, and that kind of thing and everything like that. Are you, at this time, on October 3 of the year 2013, are you optimistic, pessimistic, for the human prospect within an ecological order?
That's hard to say. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. A lot of the
you must say.
Okay.
No.
Well, I'm guardedly optimistic.
Guardedly optimistic.
But we'll see. I mean, let's see what happens with the debt limit.
You really
I can't believe they'd be foolish enough to go over the cliff. But we'll
after
see.
the 17th. Yeah.
After the 17th.
Yeah. They've never done that.
Well, they've never done that before.
But it seems to be that we're in the throes of a thing where. What do you make of the? You don't think the Tea Party? They happened to be in the 2010. They got in a lot of gerrymandering and so forth. They got control over the House of Representatives and so forth. Do you think it's a spent force, or is this thing that's still going to have to be dealt with?
I think
because it seems to be an irrational
I think if we go over the debt ceiling, that's going to hurt the Tea Party.
If
Hopefully.
could they have the ability to realize that ultimate kind of seems to me absurdity that they could do out of their own angst or their own
that I don't
perhaps ignorant reading
Yeah.
of things, you know?
Yeah,
But-
that I don't know. That I don't know.
But are they possibly a spent force? Do you think it's getting to the point where if they control the Republican Party could disappear?
The last time
and
there
leave
was
the
the last time there was a government shutdown in the 90s, it really
95,
helped.
yeah.
It really helped the Democrats.
It did help the
It did help the
Democrats
Democrats.
at that time, yeah. But now what? But going over the debts, defaulting on the T-bills and all that sort of thing, that would be absolutely catastrophic, would it not, for everybody?
It would be catastrophic.
And it would be an irrational, like lemmings leap
Yeah, like lemmings
by
leaping
these
over the
people.
cliff.
What
Right.
I'm asking you is, do you think that there was Sarah Palin or something, and the Republicans who in 2010, feeling the general angst that happened after 2008 with all the crashing of the banks and everything, there was a general angst, and it was taken into a right-wing reading of things, this Tea Party thing. Do you think maybe they are a spent force?
Yeah, hopefully they're spent force. Hopefully.
But they seem to be the force that is behind this current challenge to the human condition. It seems that way to me.
Oh, by the way, there was a Family
sir.
Guy. I don't know if you've heard of the cartoon Family Guy.
Cartoon Family
There's
Guy.
a cartoon called Family Guy.
Oh, I didn't know.
And one
that.
of the characters goes to a Tea Party amusement park.
Yeah, right.
And one of the rides there is the Tunnel of Self-Love.
narcissistic Mount Narcissism. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Anyway, so it's very challenging time, and you don't want to answer definitively on the question. I don't know what else. I don't know what stance the Democrats or the grown-ups are going to be able to take in the face of this irrational thing. I mean, the law was passed. It's been held up. It's part of the law. It was held up by the Supreme Court. And they seem to be directed at the health care issue. That seems to be defunded, and I mean, it's settled. It's law and so forth. So I don't know how we can run a system
I don't know how we can run a system
that is that way.
Being very irrational, the Republicans.
But all of these things are very much personal. It's been your pleasure to have and thanks for the primer on this, and that's very important to understand that finance and everything. And your pleasure to have the perceptions in Lawrence Feiner, Ph.D. extraordinaire, and writer of the book on Reagan and so forth. And thanks, Lawrence, for coming in.
Thank you.
Always good to talk. We got to keep talking like this. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be coming back again, well, tomorrow. But that's it for now. Again, Lawrence, thank you very, very much indeed.
Oh, okay.
Until tomorrow, thanks for viewing. So we just sort of